Well, this is part 2 of Reframing Christian Marriage. Pastor Dalrock goes on to talk about how we reframe Christian marriage to say that rebelling wives are not to blame for their own rebellion. And in this, he means that the husbands are really responsible for making their wives want to follow the biblical command to submit. And if they don't, well, it's the husband's fault. It's the husband's fault. So he gives example number 1 is from Bible.org. And it's an article, it's entitled, What Every Husband Needs to Know. And in the article, it says, to sum up, her submission will be the voluntary response to his loving leadership. So if he's not lovingly leading, then, don't worry about submitting. I think it's basically the command. Then the article goes on to say, if she receives irritability, criticism, disapproval, unkindness, indifference, yada, 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 some women will turn to drinking or submerge themselves in social activity. But when a man claims that his wife doesn't love him anymore, he is unwittingly admitting that he hasn't loved her as he should. So if the wife does not love her husband anymore, well, of course, it's his fault because he hasn't loved her the way that he should. This is Bible.org saying this. And he says, and on Bible.org, he says, most wives work hard, maybe even harder than their husbands. Oh, well, of course. And no husband ought to be above helping with the housework and the children. If the wife is really the weaker vessel, then wiping the dishes, sweeping the floor, supervising the children, cleaning the windows, or dozens of other little helpful acts are just ways of saying, I love you. And if you do these things, then she will not rebel. That is the philosophy and the theology. If you are loving her enough, then she won't rebel. It's over and over and over again here. Then he points to example number 2. He goes to about.com. About.com, which says, the question is, what does the Bible say about marriage? And so it's written by Mr. Stanton. And he, of course, goes to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23 to 32. And he says, husbands are urged to lay down their lives in sacrificial love and protection. And in this safe and cherished embrace of the loving husband, what wife would not be willing to submit to his leadership? And then he says, wives are commanded to submit to their husbands. And given this submission, what husband wouldn't be willing to love and sacrifice for his wife? Okay, now both of these are missing a very important truism, a very important theological fact rooted in the very first chapters of Genesis. And that is, it is part of the wife's curse to rebel, to want to rebel against her husband. It is part of her curse to want to do this. In Genesis chapter 3, let me read it here. The part of the curse, God says to Eve, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. That desire is, she doesn't want to submit. She wants to be the head, and therefore the husband will rule over her. So to say that, no, women will just naturally submit if you're a good enough leader, that's completely false. This is part of a woman's curse that in the power of Christ she has to overcome. It's not a matter of, well, if your husband loves you sufficiently enough, then that curse will just go away. No, that's not true. That is not true. That is not what the Bible teaches. But even with all of this confusion, we got to keep in mind that Christ is winning. He is building his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the Postmillennial Man.